The idea of density in San Diego, I use this quite a bit, this image quite a bit to open it, because I don't know about y'all's towns, but whenever we talk about density in San Diego, my city goes absolutely nuts, crazy. They raise balloons to show how the density is going to change everything. And so the idea is that I open it with this image of the lady dancing to just relax, calm down, have a little fun. It's not going to be, the conversation doesn't have to be a terrible thing. It can actually be something like a dance. And I don't know if it's working, but we are doing quite a bit of things in San Diego because we have a crisis. We have a tremendous crisis. We have a terrible homeless population issue that's actually created a hepatitis A breakout has happened in downtown because we haven't provided many facilities for our homeless people, and it's creating a health issue that we have to address today. We're simply not building enough housing, and we haven't been building enough housing for a very long time, too long of a time. We're also today chasing the new Amazon headquarters, and those would bring really tremendous jobs to San Diego, but San Diego can't really compete that well with other cities such as Salt Lake or Denver for housing because of the high cost of housing. And that's because we only build about 6,000 homes in the city of San Diego a year when we really need 15,000. So every year we are behind and get further behind. And when we try to build homes, and this is an image of the city of Encinitas, which is kind of a flashpoint of no building and no growth in San Diego, you get tremendous opposition from the local people who say, any new homes, any new building, any state mandated programs to add housing to a city will destroy the charm, will destroy the character, will create a tremendous change, and everybody is very fearful of that. So I don't know if you all have experienced this, but we need homes, we need to build development, and we're not able to build it right now. I also wanted to say that I've experienced this also personally in Utah. I was part of the team that worked on doing a new town center that was part of a general plan that was killed in a referendum, a voter referendum, a very low voter turnout, decided to not build new housing in Layton City. So you can thank me for that one too a little later. But the idea that this is ubiquitous across U.S. West is true because the U.S. West has these housing issues all across it, which is completely different than the Rust Belt cities. They don't have, the Rust Belt cities have a completely different issue, which is stagnant, non-growth, receding, how to grow differently. Whereas the people from those areas and the jobs from those areas and the new economy jobs are moving out to the U.S. West. And so pretty much every major city and region needs to build new housing. And new housing means density. Density is a form of measurement of housing. If you're going to build housing, there is a density associated with it. I think your state law talks about urban housing being one dwelling unit per acre. And that's really not an urban type of environment, but it is an increase, it is a density, it is a number of units per acre. You also need to build affordable housing, attainable housing. So you need both the low income, affordable, the median, middle income, attainable, and the full range of housing. And these are actually social justice issues. So the era of sustainability that we're entering into is the era of equity. We spent the late 60s, 70s dealing with the environmental leg of sustainability. And then we spent the 90s and the 2000s dealing with the economics of sustainability when we had the big crash. And then today, here we are, zooming and booming again in the U.S. West, and now we're dealing with social justice and people getting access to towns and cities. But then this creates backlash. This creates change. This social justice is allowing for more people to come in, change your city from what it had been, and it creates a NIMBY backlash that everybody really fears. It's terribly disappointing to have a citizen referendum on a project that you've planned for and have put funds into, and it fails. And the battle seems to be over community character. the character and the quality of life of that town or that city that you're in. And that's a very big issue. In San Diego, quality of life is very, very high. We don't have a lot of pain. We can't ask for a lot of change all at once because it's very comfortable there. Same with your region. Your region's beautiful. It's fantastic. The quality of life is very high here. You have air quality issues that I experienced in LA back in the 70s, which Richard Nixon fixed somehow. And you're dealing with the air quality issues today. That's pretty much about it. Maybe some parking at the mall or some streets being congested, but that's about it. Is the quality of life is very high. So that character and maintaining it is very important. So building new housing, you have to balance these the two issues, the public realm and the private realm, which you know your city has the planning department, which has a deal with private development standards and private development practices. And the private development are always dealing with land costs, labor agreements, labor costs. Labor costs are rising because there's so much building to be done. And then the NIMBY risk, the backlash, the entitlement risk of trying to get the things that are built at market rate with, say, your zoning that allows you to do this, but the market wants you to do that. Then you have the public housing issues where you have your state legislator giving you mandates to build a certain amount of density. You have your own local affordable housing and moderate housing policies. You have the ballot box planning and referendums that happen. And then you have housing elements where it says, we'll do this, and you should do this, and you plan for this, and you invest in this, but it doesn't have any teeth and it doesn't get built. So you have to balance these complex issues. These two issues are very, are always in conflict with each other. And then, of course, the form follows fear. Fear is natural. My family leaves the house, and I'm by myself at night, and I get scared. You know, why would I get scared in my own house that I know what is broken everywhere, and it needs to be fixed, and what's creaking, and the reason why it's creaking? It's innate in us. Fear is innate. We're built to fight or flight over any issue that comes up. And fear of change. And when we talk about housing, density, development, that's change. And that creates that fear of the unknown, or even the fear of inequity. Is somebody getting more than I have? I got this back in the day. Why are they getting this today? So that fear is very, very real. And it's something that has to be addressed every time, which will lend into the discussion of a process and a community development process or some sort of outreach process, which I don't think we're doing as well as we should because it doesn't alleviate the fears. But it is something important because it is very, very real. And the reason why housing is so important is in the U.S. West is because San Francisco has a tremendous housing crisis. It's actually created a NIMBY movement, a yes in my backyard that says that's changed the whole dialogue about the way things about the way new development is seen. And actually, the leader of the NIMBY movement seems to be a front runner for their supervisor position at the city, and that's because San Francisco is very, very expensive. It's very rich. It has the demographics are very, very rich and affluent. It has a growing population, a tremendous demand, and no easy land to build on. Everything has been built on at least once or twice, if not 3 times with the earthquake. And then if you were to supply more housing, and the graph here shows, what the graph here is showing is that they built a lot of housing, a ton of units back in the day. And as they've gone through time, they've built less and less units. And as they built less and less units, the rent has gone up and up and up. And the issue is that it's forcing people out. It's becoming a rich enclave of people where the poor and the service and the middle class have to live very, very far away and take transportation in for a very long distance, and it's keeping people out. It's becoming a social justice issue. But if you were to build enough housing to alleviate this demand and reduce the rents and make it at least attainable, it would completely change the visual character of the streets and the cityscape, which is why you go there in the first place. So there's a real balancing act there that you have to look at wages, employments, and number of units to figure out the market rent. This is an issue for San Diego when I mentioned the Amazon. If we were to bring in tremendous high-paying jobs, a lot of high-paying jobs all at once, it would only increase the rent, only increase the housing crisis because we're just not building enough units to capture that growth. But that change of that community character and that shift that you have to address the need for housing also has been attached to by the NIMBYs and the anti-growth people. This is actually one of San Diego's biggest environmental attorneys that stops most projects from happening. He's this guy who sues CEQA and NEPA, the Environmental Quality Act stuff. This is our long-term city council member who stopped a lot of new projects and new growth, who's understanding that the concept of community character, the argument is a powerful sword being thrown up by communities who really don't want change. Because they've got their quality and they want to keep other people from experiencing it and or losing that quality. And understanding the environmental groups beginning to understand that by allowing for density and growth to happen in the urban areas, in your town centers, in your urban neighborhoods that has transit, actually saves the environment, actually keeps the growth from happening in the suburban edges and further out into the nature and the wilderness. So that shift is happening too, where even community character now is being argued about as not a strict demand by the environmental groups. So that shift is happening. And what we've been building then is either very high, dense urban buildings downtown, because we decided downtown and the redevelopment agencies would allow for growth, would allow for density, and we've built a tremendous number of high-rises, as has Portland, Seattle, Denver, and San Francisco. Then we still build the conventional suburban communities out on the edge. So it's either a big tower downtown, or it's a strip center or a housing pod out on the edge of town. And so these won't keep up with our growth. These two types of models that the market wants, the high-density housing is in high demand. You can't build enough of it, and it becomes for the very wealthy, and land has become investments for international money, and Canadian money, Chinese money, European money are coming into these downtown developments like investments, and then the regular suburban sprawl development that we've been doing. And so you end up having this, is it a choice or a fate, where San Diego has built the image at the bottom, a downtown with suburban sprawl, but our policies, our general plan, our community plans are saying a city of villages, such as the top, where you have La Jolla as a village, North Park becomes a village, Uptown is a village, downtown is the downtown core. And so we have these zoning and subdivision regulations that build the bottom, but we have these policies that are asking for the top, and they're not in conformance with each other. And we need to say, we need a downtown, we need the villages and the village centers and the neighborhood centers in the middle, and we need to move out to hold an edge and have nature. So we're not building, we're missing a middle, and we're not building the types of density and the types of housing unit that is a townhouse, a small bungalow court, a fourplex, a garden apartment walk-ups in between the downtown mid-rise and the downtown tower. So this is missing. It's missing because, for a variety of reasons, but one of which is this, that the zoning and our subdivision rules really only talk about use. Is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it industrial? And if it's residential, it's so arduous and so hard to be able to build any sort of development that 200 units makes more sense than 220. It's hard. It's just as hard to build 20 or 2 units as it is to build 200 or 400 units. So you opt in for the 400 units because it takes this much time and this much money. So this missing middle is something that we need to be advocating for and filling in as we build density in our towns. Density doesn't necessarily mean more tower or more 6-story walk-up. It can mean a fourplex or a courtyard apartment. So in San Diego, I've been advocating for, with a group of people, working with the city council and the mayor's office to try to figure out how to build density. backlash by calling, we have a baseline term called beach density. And the reason why we call it beach density is because everybody loves the beach. Everybody goes to the beach. 2 weeks ago, when it was very hot in San Diego, the entire city showed up at the beach. And when you go to the beach, what you see is mixed use. There's shops. You see lots of housing, Airbnb, little hotels, large hotels, homes that have 2 or 3 units on them. And as a matter of fact, it's about 5 units per lot in the beach areas. But everybody loves the beach areas, and it has great amenities. It has a great beach. It has good parks. It has a lot of the quality of life that San Diego expects. But outside of that beach area, and there's also a height limit, and there's things that you can't do, and lots of restrictions on how high you can build because of being on the coast. But then you get outside of San Diego, and it ends up being about 1.5 units per lot, pretty much everywhere else. So we're saying, one of the things we're advocating for is saying, well, what's good for the beach is good for the rest of San Diego because we're a beach town. And really the idea is just to bump up and double the amount of housing that's allowed on pretty much every lot in San Diego. The next thing that we're saying then, so that's a baseline rise, is we're calling them climate action zones. These transit station area, corner intersection parcels and blocks where you have a new BRT bus, bus rapid transit, or a new light rail transit line that we're building. And at these corner and intersections, which were formerly strip commercial centers and just retail, we're able to build 4 to 6, 4 to 7 story buildings that we're calling climate action zones because you're able to walk to a few places, you're able to take a bus to work or beyond, and you drive less. And so we're actually able to capture our greenhouse gas emission goals for the 2035. And the climate action zones are intended to be pinpointed all across San Diego's major intersections and major streets. So between these climate action zones and this beach density, we're able to say this is part of that missing middle that we're able to begin to achieve again, instead of just downtown or just outside of the edge of town. The idea of that is, this is Salt Lake City, is you can see it here, where you are building downtown, and then you are building low-scale, low-rise suburban types of neighborhoods beyond. You have the ability to have these neighborhood centers, this missing middle. There's a lot of room for growth. You're building it, you can see it really tremendously along your light rail line up to the University of Utah. And so that model is something that fits well in most of these U.S. West cities. And the city that's doing it probably the best right now is Denver. Denver's rent has actually gone down almost 10% in the last year because they've been able to build along their transit lines. They've changed their zoning to allow for the missing middle. And Denver is doing a great job of addressing both attainable housing and affordable housing. And so the way that you can modify the complexity of fear and density and building types and placemaking is through the neighborhood unit. When you look at your city or your town as a series of neighborhoods, a community is a group of like-minded people. So many neighborhoods can make up a community. A community can be an artist community or a senior community, or even an internet community. It's bigger than a place. A neighborhood is the physical community, the physical outline of places that people in many communities can inhabit. So you can have a variety of people living in one community, and that neighborhood ends up being a finite scale. You can see it. It's usually about a quarter mile from the center to the edge, a half mile to the next center, neighborhood center. Our streets, U.S. West streets, are laid out in this half mile, quarter mile grid pattern. And that's because that's about the extent of people can walk. And we've all been talking about the mix of uses and mixed use, walkable, mixed incomes, mixed building types. You have public spaces, private spaces, churches, parks, libraries, as well as industry, retail, commerce, and housing, and it all fits together in one mixed-use neighborhood. And this neighborhood unit has been obliterated by conventional land use zoning, where residential goes here, single-family residential goes here, multifamily residential goes here, commerce goes here, and industry goes there, and the church will go over here, probably next to the industrial zone these days. And it's creating where pods of elderly live, or pods of young families live, or pods of certain income people live. And they're not connecting the way that we used to. As a community, we're connecting by car only. And if you don't have a car, good luck. You're in trouble. You're going to be driven around to the other pod where the other people like them are. So we understand the neighborhood unit. It's helped build Utah. It's the model that helped build the U.S. West. It's the model that built civilization for about 3,000 or 4,000 years. And it is coming back. We've been talking about this now for about 10 years. That neighborhood model needs to be then modified and adjusted for your context, because not every place was made at the same time. The very top is the old downtowns. The old downtowns were established first with a small grid. It was based upon maybe a train stop. And then the next level of development that came after the old downtowns and the small towns was the streetcar neighborhood. The streetcar neighborhood started to grow and become a little larger than the downtown neighborhood, a little more transportation oriented. And then the next set of development pattern in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond was the suburban communities, where you have the bigger, more accessible. So the things that you do, the tools that you use to build density or to build housing or to build the missing middle should be slightly different from your downtown to your small town or your streetcar neighborhood to your suburban Newtown neighborhood. And so taking that into account, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You have to use different tools for different contexts, for different places. And the way that urban design and urban planning should approach the social equity problem, this housing problem, this density problem, is through neighborhood balance. These neighborhoods that we're creating and or inhabiting or investing in or fixing needs to be a balanced neighborhood. And that's the part of governance. That's what government does. We help create a level playing field for as many as possible. And there's economic markets that fit within these types of neighborhoods. So you have three types of markets that you cycle through. Your older neighborhoods, it's easy to see. When they were first established in the 1920s, they were tremendous neighborhoods, very high value at the lot level and at the neighborhood level. But then the car culture came in the 60s. It went down. The values went very low. People kind of abandoned it. It was disinvested in. And then about 10 years ago, these kids with beards and tight pants and the hipsters showed up on bicycles and coffee and all of that the new craft craze. And now those neighborhoods are valuable again. So it goes from an emergent market to maybe an established market to an expired or a disinvested market. And it rolls around, And some places stay in one place fixed in time for a while. So that you can look, so when you're looking at your city or you're looking at your town and then you're looking at your individual neighborhoods, and you need to understand that you need a different set of tools, a different set of way of looking at that expired, disinvested sort of neighborhood that has low lot and block value and low neighborhood value. That's one end of the spectrum. Because you need to look at it differently than the higher end of the spectrum, where the very wealthy, the rich, the more invested, the lot and block of high value, and the neighborhood of high value places. The tools you use to fix this neighborhood are different than the tools you'd use to address the issues in this neighborhood. And so understanding where you are in that spectrum, I think is a very important way of addressing density in your neighborhood. That's part of the issue with your state legislators saying you're going to do a housing density or a affordable housing ordinance that's going to say, I don't know, what's the number being bantered around? 20 dwelling units per acre. You're going to have 20 dwellings per acre, 20 dwellings per acre here. Well, the 20, how you put that in how that housing, 20 dwelling units per acre is, which is not a certain size. It could be a mid-rise, it could be a taller building, it could be a shorter building, it could be a sprawling building, it could be a compact building. Density is just a measurement. the types of buildings you put into this neighborhood and how you finance and invest in it is different than this one here. If you use the same one, you're going to make both of them mad. You're not going to get there. And what you want to achieve then is balance, because this neighborhood here is keeping out people that need access and want to live in these types of or wants to live in your city, in your town, and this one is keeping people from investing and being a part of it. So you need to be able to get to a balance. And so the way, I'm going to show you how we're doing this in San Diego with 3 different neighborhoods within this 3-mile corridor in our urbanized area of downtown. You can see Balboa Park's in the left-hand side, the downtown and the Bay is on the far left-hand side, and the 3 neighborhoods that I want to talk about real quick are Rolando, which is on the far left, which was built in the 1920s. North Park, which is in the middle, which was built in the 1900s, and then Uptown, which is on the left, which was built in like the 1880s, which is when they were established. Meaning, it went over time, the city grew further out, but they're still all almost about 100 years old, and they've been through their cycles. So they're all connected on the same corridor, El Cajon Boulevard. There's a bus rapid transit system on it. There's even light rail coming through one of the areas. So the neighborhood in Rolando, Rolando Heights is what it's called, is disinvested. It hasn't had new development since the car dealerships you see in the foreground and the motels along the highways since the 60s. The land value of individual lots is low, but the neighborhood overall San Diego land value market's very high. And the only real new development that's built here is a subsidized affordable housing. And what the subsidized affordable housing does in this neighborhood is very little but add more poor people to a poor area. It doesn't build comps for new development to use to build new development or to build value. It doesn't add investment to the neighborhood. It only adds people of the same socioeconomic scale. And so the approach that we would take to Rolando is everything, anything, do it. Joint use fields for the schools so that the public would have more parks. More parks mean you could build more townhouses and or granny flats on the existing buildings. More infill and transit-oriented development at the transit stations, gateways, boulevards, complete streets. Everything and anything needs to happen here because nothing has been happening for so long. And the key to doing this isn't just isn't to treat it like you would treat another neighborhood. You have to treat this separately and treat this differently. We're calling this a pink zone, where your entitlement will be mostly by right if you build the types of buildings that fit into what the community says that they want. And then you're going to get fee reductions, and you're going to have expedited permit times. The other issues that we're also going to end up having the affordable housing groups called LISC, which is a local initiative, a support service that gets that does HUD money and community block grant money, neighborhood works. Instead of them working together with the banks to build an affordable housing complex, we're trying to get them to work with banks to do development training, development boot camps, learn how to be a developer, learn how to get an education and training for a trade or a development to unlock the potential of the entire neighborhood's value at your individual lot scale, and build enough comps so that when the next person comes in, they're able to build the same thing and the bank will lend that money. This is on the opposite end of the spectrum is Uptown District. Uptown District is extremely, is a well-to-do neighborhood. It is under extreme development pressure because there's money from Tokyo, London, New York trying to get into here and build whatever development they can build. The very wealthy and well-educated people are saying no new growth, no change, nothing here. And the issue is that the land values are very high. And what's missing is not that high-end New York, Tokyo investment in a tower that would create more high-end housing. The issue they need is affordable housing, subsidized housing, small unit housing that allows folks who do the type of work that supports this neighborhood, that would balance out this neighborhood and cool off the rent and the the high cost of trying to move in and live in this area. So it would be we're trying to be very tactical with the accessory dwelling unit. Granny flat ordinance is going to be allowed into here in a way that incentivizes it so that the individual can see the value of having a granny family small lot in your own yard. And then do subsidized housing at transit stations. We know this is where new units want to go. Partner with developers, have inclusionary zoning that makes you build housing as well as in lieu fees, and another idea of a combination of these to help your bottom line, and so that a private developer and or an affordable housing developer can partner on a new project built at these transit stations where they do say if they allow for growth, it'll be allowed there. So it's very strategic, very pinpoint in order to get subsidized housing to cool off this market. And then the last one is my neighborhood, North Park. North Park just went through a community plan update. We battled over density and won. And we're able to do this. And the reason why we're able to do it is because this neighborhood's actually pretty balanced. It has a variety of demographics. The rent isn't that high. It's not as low as Rolando. It's not nearly as high as Uptown. But it's on the same corridor. It has the bus rapid transit. But what we're doing here is this balanced neighborhood, this more complete neighborhood, we can be creative, we can be innovative. So we're starting to look at new bike systems, new bike complete streets, lanes on different streets, new parking systems, parking management, and new incubator types of economic, retail, and housing systems in order to allow for some innovation and test and see what works. You don't really want to test the poor. They're already, at ends. They're already having trouble. And you don't really want to test with the rich, even though they can afford it, but they're not as easy to work with. And so therefore, the middle income folks are the places where you can try things. And if they don't work, it's not going to upset the balance. And so we're able to do those innovations, and we're looking at new bus rapid transit, new types of parking reductions, bike share, car share, and complete streets to go along with some of the new craft commerce that's happening there. So it's a very exciting time to be working in San Diego and talking about this stuff. And the way that you hack the system, that we're hacking the system to do these balanced neighborhood, is the idea of pink zones, which is cutting red tape. Cut the red tape. You're able to say this area here is going to have opportunities and incentives that other areas don't. Missing middle and climate action zones. Bump up the density in everywhere. Allow for the granny flat. Allow for the secondary dwelling unit. Allow for the small-scale housing to come in. And climate action zones. You are going to all cities. California's lead. You just wait. In about 10 years, you're going to be having to deal with rules and regulations from the state that will say you need to lower your greenhouse gas emissions, and you do that by mode split, where you have more people biking, walking, and taking transit and car share and bike share and balanced with driving. I mean, right now in San Diego, it's 91% single drivers and 9% walking and biking, even though we have the best climate to be outside in and walk around and ride your bike in the United States. It's just not there yet. And we have to get there by 2035. The other part is training. We need some training to have these developer boot camps. We're partnering with the Woodbury School of Architecture to have this Architect as Developer program where the student loans are actually wrapped up into land deals. And they're building a project with their student loan, land loan, and at the end of their 1 year, they have a building that's on the market that they're making money with. It begins to build a comp that goes that improves that neighborhood, and we're trying to get those to branch out from right now. They're in one neighborhood. Banking, when we want microloans, infill lending programs. We're already working with the LISC and the Neighborhood Works, and then finally the shift to complete streets. We know that we're too auto-oriented and that we have to allow for access for more people by moving to complete streets. So these types of programs are being put into play right now. And I'm going to show you part of the reason why the community character and the density creates such problems. So this is North Park, the last one, the balanced neighborhood that I talked about, which has an old commercial main street. The CC is community commercial. And then it has an R residential, single-family detached. These are old bungalows from the 1920s with a few 1960s garden apartments put in. And what happened is now in this era of urbanism and hipster and people wanting to live in cool places, and this is a very cool place, the residential is bumping up against the commercial. So in that transition, zoning has put, the planning has put in a zoning code that's actually like, well, it should be a little bit of residential, it should be a little bit of commercial in this transition zone between the two land uses, and that way, people will be able to comfortably move from one place to the other. What has happened is that transition area has become the best zoning in San Diego. You can do mixed use, small lots, small unit. It's close to transit, it's close to the shopping, it's close to the fun places, but it has really, really great zoning. And so all of the new development is actually going in the zone between the neighborhoods and the main street. And so this is the commercial area, which is mostly two-story buildings throughout. This is the residential area, which is mostly two-story buildings and bungalows, small lot bungalows throughout. And this is all the new development that's coming in that seam in between, which is 4 to 6 stories, if not a very mixed use, high density, and it's bumping into the old bungalow neighborhood and creating all the tension. So this is what the neighborhood ends up looking like. And so what happens is everybody's mad. Everybody's angry. The neighborhood association folks that are in the bungalows are mad that they have a 6-story building right next to them, and the shops and the commercial people are mad because they can't build that kind of density on their very high-valued land. They can only build commercial. And so what we've been coming up with is the idea, we know what we want. This is what we want. We want a robust Main Street. We want mixed use and vibrancy on a shopping street, on a transit street, on a bike street and walking street. And we want it to transition to the neighborhood, the more quiet street, the more quiet type of place that eventually goes to the rural edge. So these types of places matter. And our zoning is completely creating, at odds with that and creating tension and creating NIMBYs, creating anger. And so we worked with them on our community plan, talked about what they wanted, and they understood, well, this is what the historic preservation folks wanted and the environmental folks wanted. This is also what the landowners wanted, and yet it was illegal. So we're changing our zoning to this place-based zoning that says center, middle, edge, historic districts, park places, and creating these place types in our zoning ordinance and our community plan, which I'll talk more about in a minute, has been a deal that we made with the NIMBYs and the development groups to say, this is how we're going to build our community in the future. It's going to have an urban center that transitions to a more rural edge. And on our community plans, we were able to raise the density. Every other community plan update that's been going on in the city of San Diego, except in the poorer areas, has been a down zone, an absolute down zone at the general plan level. The policy levels have been down zoning. This is the first one. It was we worked on this for about 4 years with the city. It wasn't an easy because it took time to work with the individual groups. But once we were able to upzone in an urban neighborhood. And everybody's very excited about that and what that means for the future. So this is an example of what was built. This is the new 6-story stuff that's actually off Main Street into the neighborhood. And this is an example on the right of what we want to do, build up multi-story, multi-floor, multi-use, all the commerce you can imagine that steps down to the thing. We know what we want. We know everybody understands what a neighborhood's supposed to look like. It's just a matter of putting all these complex rules and policies into place to be able to get you there. The issue then comes back to that image I showed is really community character. I don't expect you to be able to read this slide, but there are actually a group of us with Andres Duani and Leon Creer and people that you've heard of have worked in Utah as well, have come up with the idea that there is actually only 16 community character types. There's either the very, very organic, and it's relationship between the urban pattern of streets and blocks, public and private, And then the three-dimensional pattern of buildings, of public and private buildings. So how you assemble your public and private buildings on your public and private spaces creates character. And you can actually do the pattern of a Taos, New Mexico village, ancient Indian village, all the way to Beijing's Red Square and its imperial architecture and engineering. There is a spectrum. We're lucky, because we're in the US West and everything is on a grid, really only about 4 or 5 of these fit. But understanding community character, being able to have the database to show this is the character and understanding of your town and how you can either add to it or subtract from it to change or maintain that character in a very strategic way is possible. Community character is something that gets thrown at you all the time because it's hard to describe. You know, you know it when you see it, but it's hard to describe. And if you can describe it, and we're able to start doing this description in our design guidelines, in the street design manual in the city of San Diego, we're able to say, well, no, ma'am, you're wrong, or sir, this is the community character of the patterns of this area, and this development will fit into that or not fit into that, depending on your political will. So understanding community character and taking it on, I think, is an important thing to do because that will help you have that dialogue about what new density and new housing can go into it. So I'll go into some recommendations and we'll open it up to some questions. So the complexity of placemaking, it's overwhelming all of the things that you can do. You have the ability to do a lot of tax and incentives. You have short-term taxes like abatements or a fee reduction, long-term city taxes, sales tax increment. There's land. You have land that you can partner with or land that you can sell. There's state level incentives out there for transit-oriented development or other kinds of development. And you have the ability to play with these complex things. You have a variety of affordable housing things. But all that can go out of control. You have the market, you have private development, you have NIMBYs, you have all of these things. The complexity of that placemaking comes down to if you use this neighborhood model, this neighborhood scale, it will make the complexity manageable. That's the point of using the neighborhood scale. And use place-based, context-sensitive, form-based types of coding to help you out. The same thing that created the problem that we're trying to fix in the 40s, 50s, and 60s isn't going to fix it in the 20s, 30s, and 40s of tomorrow. And so this place-based or context-sensitive coding is built at the neighborhood scale. It's built to supply your missing middle housing standards that conventional zoning has a problem implementing. And you can adjust it to be either administrative with very little review or legislative with a lot of review. It just depends on how you want to code your place. One neighborhood might be historic and you want to preserve it. Lock it down, make it hard. One neighborhood might be needing everything, unlock it. And these types of codes can do that, whereas conventional zoning we all know very, very well. And this is New Orleans. And we understand that downtown is big and urban, and that as you move to midtown, it becomes a little less urban, but it's still pretty high intensity. And as you move out of town, it becomes more suburban and rural on the edge. This is all illegal under the zoning today. You can't build this town again like this, and we should be making these things legal again. And you're starting to. You're starting to. Also, do the math. A lot of this stuff is where your zoning ordinance, and you'll open it up, and really there's only one page that has everything on it that you really always go to. Question that page. Same with your Public Works manual. One page. It says here's the radius. Do the math and see if that's working for you today, because when you have bicycles and pedestrians on your streets now, the turning radiuses for the car doesn't quite make it anymore. When you're trying to decide what to do with that new Amazon headquarters that's coming to your town, make the right tax moves that doesn't give away money. Because we understand that mixed use urbanism, the downtown, small lot, mixed intent stuff makes more money for your city than that big suburban flagship development out on the end of town. Joe Minicozzi and Chuck Marone's been here at this forum before. Joe Minicozzi is working in Ogden, Utah right now on showing these tax generations and the data. And when you see the data, it's easy to make those decisions. And so a lot of times you don't, you kind of assume things and just take things for granted the way that things have been for a while. Go ahead and do the math and question it and see if your retail sales are working well the way that you're doing it, or if you need to adjust something to make it work better for you. And these are lists of types of ways to deal with affordable housing. You can deal with affordable housing with regulation. You can deal with affordable housing in financing. You can deal with affordable housing with development and management. And all of these types of things are some work in some areas better than other areas. You have access to them all, but if you don't, you can control all of this affordable housing complexity at the neighborhood scale if you're trying to achieve balance. And the idea that balance is very important because it creates civilization. It helps us talk and work better together with each other. Being in a society and participating in society is innate as much as fear is. So when you balance your population, you try to get young people living with old people rather than a pod of people. You're wealthy people living with less wealthy people, social strata. That's complex. And then those who work and generate and those who need to be cared for. We need to balance those. You can't have a community that's just poor, cared for people. It will take too much resources from the other ones that are trying to be balanced. Balance your economy. You know, manufacturing, local manufacturing versus importing. Understand that. Do the math. Balance the way that you commute and communicate with each other. Private and public transit. There's the ability to have private transit systems in Utah. It doesn't all have to be public transit to get around. And we're seeing that with the shared economy, the Lyft, the Ubers. The balance of the urban pattern. The local craft technique versus high technology. Have those balances. We know chasing the high technology dream is good, but you have local craftsmen and local people that need to be in your society too. And then governance, top-down, big idea, big decisions versus participatory decisions. Not every issue has to be resolved with a neighborhood group coming in and talking. There's also issues that have to be solved at the regional and the citywide level, and you're allowed to do that. So if you build towards balance, you're building towards that idea of collective people working in like a school or a church. You know, a neighborhood supports an elementary school and a church, and then several neighborhoods together support that middle school, high school, or that ward or that stake. It's all connected into this idea of a balanced community that governance is responsible for. And I say this: you're attempting. Salt Lake City is one of the most progressive I've seen. And the streets are big and wide, and they're fast, but you're doing things that liberal, hip, cool cities aren't trying on your streets. And your public transit is fantastic. When I leave here, I'm going to take the train and go to the airport and not have to go rent a car or things of that nature. I can ride streetcar, I can ride commuter train, I can go to South Jordan. I can do all kinds of really great things with your commuter, LRT, BRT, bicycle, sharing, and bike lane facilities. It's fantastic. So good job, and you should be proud of yourselves and see this as an ability of creating social equity. More people are able to access your city and town that can get on these types of facilities. And then when you're doing your inclusionary and in lieu fee types of affordable housing, there are new tools out there. One of the new tools is part of your development application, and this is in the city of Somerville, Massachusetts, and actually this week in the city of San Diego, we're taking it through our technical advisory committee for a zoning update, is have the developers submit their profit loss margin calculations and their return on investment with a calculation of inclusionary or affordable housing and which one works best for them in order to, in their area, in their place, in order to get the most bang for your buck. You're not trying to make a developer go broke, and we are trying to provide as much housing as available to incomes that are diverse. And if everybody's on the same page and working together and essentially opening your books on your affordable housing part, you can make it happen. And it's happening. I would check out the city of Somerville's approach and watch what the city of San Diego does next. Most developers don't like to do this. It is a staff level review. It does end up being public record, so you have to watch for that. But it also, by having this sort of discussion out in the open, I think it'll bring more people to the table who are afraid or scared of inclusionary or in lieu fee housing before, that didn't want to participate and play. And now I think it'll help people participate and get involved without being afraid of it. Also, there's a friend of mine, he used to be a client, who also was a colleague and is now a competitor, Mike Hathorn over here with Michael Baker International. Mike, raise your hand. He's put together a Utah-based community development code that deals with this neighborhood scale policy and regulation. It can either be a part of your zoning ordinance and entitlement, or it can be a part of your general plan policies that tell you, here's how I can do all of these variety of things. It's based on this neighborhood scale. And then it goes into types of parks, types of streets, types of places, types of buildings, all the things that make up a town or a neighborhood. But it's all in one place, and it's all been refined over the last 10 years of trying to do form-based codes in Utah. This is actually a Utah-based code, and I'm very excited about what it means. And then in the city of San Diego, these are the things that we're doing specifically right now in our zoning ordinance. We've enacted a small lot ordinance. The idea is to build those bungalow courts, those old bungalow courts that were on the streetcar. They're impossible to do today because of state law, tentative mapping, which means really you want to do 200 units and not these 6 or 8 units. And we're trying to limit the brain damage on small lot subdivisions. The issue is that it's a discretionary, or you'll call it a legislative review, and we're trying to make that legislative review as streamlined and as cheap and as fast as possible so that people can rebuild these small lot subdivisions in your urban neighborhoods on a single lot. The accessory dwelling unit or granny flat ordinance is the state has mandated it. We have to be in conformance with the law. The issue we have is our subdivision rules and our zoning rules want to make every new unit you build a new greenfield type of unit on a raw lot. So we have the fire fees, the fire sprinklers, the diff fees, the school fees, the water, sewer water. It all remains very, very expensive. You get a new parking lot assigned to it, your parking goes up, your fees go up. It ends up costing for a 400 square foot unit about $150,000 at best with construction costs today, which is very, very expensive for a small granny flat unit. You might not like your in-laws that much. So we're working right now to figure out how to lower the diff fees, how to actually make the park fees and the school fees spread out over a longer period of time, and reduce the parking requirement, because the parking requirement is what adds that 400 square foot unit ends up becoming a 735 square feet is what you end up really paying for, which is why it becomes also so expensive. And so the suburban rules have to be taken away when you're doing this urban type of infill. The parking size and unit size are reducing. We've got shopkeepers' quarters and work quarters that are able to come into either the shopkeepers' quarters are allowed, is allowing for commercial in a primary residential area, and a live-work quarters is allowing for residential in a primary commercial area, allowing for this mixed use and this place space. And really what it's doing, it's allowing for a very small unit to happen. And we've lowered, and if you associate that with an affordable housing project, then your parking is reduced in more than half. So we're trying to get people to understand that building in urban areas is not the same as building in suburban areas, and that you need different rules, and we need to allow for this small unit housing and this mixed-use housing and this craft commerce and this industry to thrive in the urban areas, rather than putting another big brewery for our craft beer out on the edge in our industrial land. And then finally, I shouldn't say finally, there's one more. The affordable housing density bonus incentives. this is where the beach density made it. So the beach density that I showed you, what ended up happening is if you opt into the Affordable Housing Density Bonus Program, you can waive 5 zoning rules. This went through all the readings. There was no opposition to it. What we essentially allowed to do is say, you can build up to 5 units on your lot, and you get to take off, you get 5 waivers, 5 reductions on your zoning. You can do height, parking, density, setbacks, you name it. You get 5. Now, it's on a sliding scale. If you provide on-site housing, inclusionary housing, you get all 5. If you do in lieu and inclusionary, you get up to 4. If you just do in lieu, it's down to 3. So it's a sliding scale because we want people to build the housing. We don't want to put it into a fee and build an affordable unit out in somewhere else. We want the housing in the neighborhoods. We think this is revolutionary. We think this is a ground changing for San Diego. It's going to allow for a lot more units. Affordable units and small units, and we're very excited about this one. And we're excited to see what sort of waivers happen, because if we see consistent waivers, we're going to change the zoning ordinance to get rid of those sorts of rules that are causing the most problems. And then we're doing our community plan updates. Our community plan updates are something that Utah state law allows. Utah, Hawaii, California have sort of the same state planning legislation. And you can do a general plan, community plans that either sit at your general plan level and policy, or they can sit in your zoning and subdivision rules. And we have 36 community plans in our cities. We don't have to update them all because not all of the communities are changing. A lot of the communities were built in the 60s and are staying the same until the air conditioners go out pretty soon. And we're changing by having these community plans, we're able to identify the neighborhoods the way that I showed you, and then we're able to use zoning, apply zoning in these certain areas differently than you would in the next neighborhood over or the next community over. And what happened was there were so many strange rules and zones that had been applied over time, such as no pachinko parlors, and I don't think we've seen a pachinko parlor since '72. That we're building up. We were able to clean these out with our community plan updates and either upzone or allow for new innovative types of streets and transit facilities. And you have the ability to do this. And I don't think your cities and communities take advantage of the community plan aspect of your general plan or zoning ordinance rules. And I would look into that because that's how you will be able to manage the very complex issues of density, affordable housing, and new development in your neighborhoods. And I'd like to finish with saying the architecture of the city and public space is a matter of common concern to the same degree as laws and language. They are the foundation of civilization. Thank you all very much, and I appreciate you listening, and I hope to answer any questions that you have. There's a microphone running around, and I have two questions right down front. So I should have had another cup of coffee. That was.
You talked about how the middle class is the place to experiment because if it fails long term, it doesn't necessarily mess with too many things.
No,
you're going to qualify that.
I'll qualify. It's not the middle class. It's a balanced neighborhood that has affluent and poor areas. So not just the middle class neighborhood, but the one that it ends up being in the middle rung of that economic spectrum.
Fair enough. So my question is, innovation is important, but innovation also means the risk of failure.
That's right.
The issue with failure is that at a staff level, it's easier to take a long-term view of things and understand that failure is not necessarily the end of the world, and
right.
That's an important part of growth.
That's right.
However, elected officials have to face the people every 4 years, right. And failure can mean you're out of office in the next election.
That's right.
So in San Diego, how have you helped decrease risk aversion, increase the risk for tolerance for failure among your elected officials?
Yeah, so what we're able to do, and North Park's a great example, because what's happening in North Park is there's, and this is a bit foreign, but there's a craft beer and craft wine and craft coffee That's the other one. It's on this one corridor where there's breweries and wineries and coffee shops that are all on this one corridor. And so what we've had planned, of course, for a very long time is streetcar. Well, we can't get streetcar right now. It's just not in the books. It's not something we can afford. So what they're doing is they're allowing for private jitney service to bring transportation along this corridor. And making it private, there actually has been a failure in that service. But the people learned from that failure, and now there's another one. It also, by looking at this situation individually and allowing a pilot project that had a short time frame to it, such as our new beach density 5 waivers, there's going to be a time frame to that to see what works and doesn't work. So making it a pilot project doesn't put you all in politically. Giving it a time frame keeps you out of an election year, and allowing for public-private partnership to do it, where your our streets and stormwater folks allowed for this private jitney service to set up on the right-of-way stop signs so you people knew where to get on and get off, and temporary. So there's very little government leadership, but support, and allowing for the community to lead it helped that issue. Because in Uptown, the richer neighborhood, they are stopping bike lanes. Bike lanes are trying to go in. Sandag said they were going, the regional COG said, we're going to put bike-separated lanes, bike tracks, and the business improvement districts said no. The community planning group said no, and they're fighting it tooth and nail because it was mandated from the state, from the COG regional. And they didn't work with it like the other one. So you're exactly right. You have to be able to customize it. And I say innovate in small time frames, public-private partnerships where the government supports a bigger idea. Does that help? Thank you. Good question.
I found your PowerPoint very interesting and alarming in some incidences.
Good.
So I've lived in New York City for about 15 years. And there we had a grocery store on every other block. The parking was limited. Most of the individuals had to park outside the city in New Jersey and other areas.
New Jersey.
So, but now I live in Draper, Utah. All right. Now we have built 1,000 apartments, 60 units per acre with 1.5 parking spots. Not my cup of tea, especially right next to the freeway. Okay. It causes problems. It causes islands where people in the East Bench cannot now get to the freeway because of the high density that's kind of lining our 15, our highway.
Which we'll get into air quality and quality issues there.
But with 1.5 parking spots per unit for 1,000 units, individuals do not have a grocery store a block away.
Yeah.
Their grocery store is 3 miles away.
Yeah.
You're still going to need those cars.
Yeah.
Now, you have 1,000 apartments, you probably need 2 people to pay rent. Now you have 1,000 people that do not have a parking spot. They're going to trickle into our neighborhoods, and they're going to park along the streets of our neighborhoods.
Right.
Some of these neighborhoods have $300,000 homes to $5 million homes.
Right.
They're not going to be happy with the influx of parking to accommodate these 1,000 units. So when you said only 0.25 parking spots per unit,
right,
that was very alarming to me.
Yeah.
Because I know when I don't stick to my code of 2.5 parking spots per unit for high density, no one has a place to park.
Right.
So, that's an alarming thing, and also the tremendous lack of green space. If I don't provide parks for my individuals to play soccer and baseball and football and all those sports that are demanding in my community, my citizens are going to be very upset with me. I noticed in the slides that you're showing me is the tremendous lack of green space. So those are 2 things that I'd like you to address.
Okay. First, thank you very much. Right, you're addressing the issues of too much and not enough at the same time. First of all, New York is very old. It's matured into this, what it is today. You're really not going to change it quite a bit. The area that you're talking about is brand new. So time is an issue of urbanism. You don't get all of the green spaces and all the grocery stores and all the urban amenities first. You usually have to get, unless you subsidize it, unless your town says these are the things that we want to do to attract development. But when there's high demand, you don't have to do that. So you can wait and let the development grow and then use those fees, because those people that are there that are jamming up your freeway off-ramp are also paying taxes. They're also paying fees. They're also going and changing the demographics and the way that retail and grocery stores would look at your community, right? So there is the time element of these things can come, and right now it could be a problem, but in the future, the grocery store will want to locate there because you have 2,000 people that are living in this area that need this service. So there's that element of it. And as far as parks, the types of parks that you described are actually regional scale parks, because not just this 600 units need a ballpark and a softball field. The whole a 3-mile region could use that. But what they do need are plazas, greens, paseos. So understanding that changing the zoning that goes from 3 people per 3 acres per 1,000 people for your parks, regardless of what it is, and that ends up making a park into a big giant regional park, which ends up not actually addressing all the open space needs of that local person. It's addressing the needs of the whole of a region area, that type of ball field, ball place. So the point is put the right stuff in the right place. Have a set of tools that allow you to have for the 2,000 people and the 1,000 new units or 600 new units that you're talking about. Have the right types of open spaces for them, rather than saying we need to build a giant ball field next door to it, because that creates tension. Now, the location of housing, of high density housing next to a freeway is an interesting idea, because what you're probably doing is putting high density in one area, and then you're not putting density throughout. And so it becomes this pod of high density housing that won't improve over time if you don't allow for that, allow for these types of new units to inhabit your whole neighborhood. You're not building a neighborhood with a pod and a big regional park, you're building pods. So I would say look into, instead of putting it all in one space in one place, either your park or your density, look at putting it at a neighborhood scale and creating a sense of balance to it. Well, I apologize for that. The point I'm trying to make is that green space is saved, the natural area is saved by having the intensity and density in your neighborhood centers, in your neighborhoods, in your urban towns, but you don't want the same green space that's in the mountains and the things to be in your towns. You want different types of green spaces. Because I actually did show one slide, but the picture was very small, of Mike's community, civic space and public park types. There's urban types of open spaces, and there's rural or suburban types of open spaces, and they're not the same scale or size. They change as you go by place type. If you just have a pod of housing, that's the beginning of new growth, and that's the beginning of different types of park spaces than what you probably had there before. So the time is the issue that you're going to have to deal with, and that's a part of planning and city making. But thank you very much for your question. And I also didn't put a whole lot of small towns in my slides, and there's a lot of small town people that are here too.
I had a question.
Please.
Right here.
Can
So
you raise your hand? Oh, thank you.
yes.
And then next is out there. Thank you.
Somerville approach that you had mentioned, I thought
Yeah.
it was interesting. So I can see where you're coming from about having affordable housing and all these other opportunities in the neighborhood. But in the example that you mentioned with Somerville, why should neighbor residents be sympathetic to developer profit margins when it will change the character of their neighborhood? And shouldn't the current residents' opinion matter more than accommodating future residents?
No, and because that's governance, number one. Number two, the idea of being able to adjust the affordable housing requirement of either in lieu fee or inclusionary on site is to address neighborhood character specifically. So in Somerville, they have these things called 3 flats, where there's a single family detached home that's quite big that has 3 units in each house, 3 units in each house. And now they're able to build a granny flat that has 2 units in there, and then they can expand the house to have either 6 units in there as well. So they end up adding, each lot can end up adding about 4 to 6 units. If one might be built, so they'll get to decide if that, adding that unit and building that unit makes more sense in that zone, in that community, or if paying a fee helps that community better. So you have the option, and it's a matter of, The issue of, does it matter if a developer's making money? No, but if you don't make any money, if you're not making any, in our economy, which is market capitalistic based, if you're not making money, you're not getting investment. And if you're not getting investment, you're not fixing that street, you're not fixing that sidewalk, you're not putting that fireman or that sheriff or that police officer on the street for you. You have to be able to continue to bring revenue into your city. Now, how much revenue is the issue that I was trying to say of balancing. In San Francisco, they're willing to give up character to get housing. But in Somerville, they're trying to balance that character because there actually are a lot of old families and old residents in that area, and they understand that they like the way things are, so they're trying to be careful. So being able to customize it, having this full list of complexity of complex things that you can do, needs to be managed at that neighborhood scale. And so that's what the spreadsheet's trying to do, is look at the areas, area by area by area, and see this area has a lot of affordable housing that's built there, so why don't we take fees from this area and build some in this area that hasn't had a lot. And look for the city of San Diego. It should be coming out as well, where they're trying to do this this return on investments a study as part of your application. Thank you.
I have a question about the affordability of housing. In the neighborhoods you described where you have high value and high appeal,
Right.
If you are able to get additional density, what we find is that that additional density is all market-based, meaning it's all very high-priced.
That's right.
So do you have, and there's probably not any one answer, but do you have any suggestions for us as to how, when we create additional density, how we can increase affordability?
Yeah, definitely. So that was what I was trying to say about the Uptown, is that instead of using LISC and NeighborWorks and our community affordable housing developer crews to work in the poor area with the poor value and subsidize it, direct them, work with them to work in that affordable, richer neighborhood, so that you can put subsidized housing in there, because subsidized housing is not on the market, and it'll end up adding supply without adding the cost, like our downtown. So our downtown has tremendous amount of new housing. About a third of it is second and third homes for wealthy investments. It's just units and downtowns are an investment portfolio package now. And so that's changing the character of it. And so we're adding a ton of housing, but the value keeps going through the roof. So we're trying to say in the neighborhoods, at the neighborhood scale, let's subsidize, put subsidy in the rich area and be very strategic and careful about it, because you're going to get the NIMBY backlash. But if you put it into, package it up with private developers, and you put these private developers with these subsidized developers together, and you focus on transit stations and areas you know can change those few spots, you can add supply without without increasing the rent. It's not easy, but it's something that's what city council members and mayors do. Because if they can do that in that area and not blow up the area and just say one size fits all, we're going to do inclusionary housing across the city, that will create tension in both areas, and more people will be mad. Customize it by your neighborhood through your community plan updates. Thank you all any last questions? Thank you all very much. Thank you.